I am going to talk to you guys about hiring junior designers. Show of hands, how many of you guys think you'll be hiring junior designers sometime soon? Fantastic. And how many of you guys are junior designers looking to be hired? Fantastic. So we got a good blend of both kinds of folks around here. I hope you will all find this inspiring and useful in your desire to match with each other. So here's what I'm going to cover. Why junior designers are awesome. Who am I even talking about? We'll go through common challenges that I've observed in working with junior designers and what you can specifically do about it, and how you can evaluate and select junior designers when they apply for the roles on your team. And I will end with a bold challenge for you all. Let's see, here's my clicker. So who's a junior designer? Some of these faces are going to look a little bit familiar if you look around this room. They're probably not what you expect. So I'm not talking about generations. I'm not talking about folks who just graduated from college. The faces you see on the screen here are some of my students from the Design Immersive at General Assembly. And the thing that's extraordinary about the folks who have come through my classrooms, these folks, there's a former trial lawyer, there's an installation sculptor, somebody who was a delegate for Bernie Sanders, a deep sea diver, a finance director, a mom returning to work after 10 years, having been a customer service, customer experience director. The folks who are entering our field come from an extraordinarily diverse background and bring all kinds of extraordinary perspectives to our profession. Certainly there are some specific issues to hiring young folks that are straight out of school. We're not really talking about the millennial issue here. We're not really going to be talking about stereotypes. I want to talk about what I've experienced and what the 10, 15 folks that I've talked to in doing my research have noticed about working with junior designers, and give you all the tools to be able to work really well with junior designers and make best use of the talents that these guys and gals bring. So when I talked to design leaders from around the world, what's awesome about working with junior designers across the board, what everybody said was, wow, they are exploding with enthusiasm. They are excited. They bring passion and curiosity to their work and to your companies. There is nothing more inspiring than folks who have chosen, I mean, certainly my boot camp students, they quit their jobs. They threw down 3 months of their lives and a giant pile of money to join this field that so many of us have come to take for granted. Their curiosity and their fresh perspective is absolutely infectious. And I heard that across the board from all the design leaders that I spoke to. My friend Mags, who is in Australia, she taught the first design leadership workshop I ever went to, probably 15 years ago. This is what she had to say about working with junior designers. There's this pay-it-forwardness about investing in the future of our industry that is rewarding in and of itself. There's something about the love that people who are new to the industry bring to their work every day. Those of us who have been around the block more than once, maybe more times than the bus, we forget. There's nothing as exciting as having people who love design to remind you why you did it in the first place. So, the Germans have a word, günstig, as opposed to billig. And günstig is you get good value for your money, and billig is cheap. I don't want anybody to think that junior designers are cheap. The truth is, you get an extraordinary value from hiring junior people and bringing them onto your team because they are willing to work for less than those of us who have been around for a long time. The point is that you get talent for an affordable price, not that you're getting something for nothing, and not that you're getting services or time that is cheap. One of the things that I found, I want to walk around, but I'm concerned about crossing that thing, so I'm just going to stand here. One of the things that I found that surprised me in my research is that many of the design leaders I spoke to talked about the fluidity and the blend of the folks who were coming into the industry. Now, those of us who have been around for more than about 10 years, we really came from kind of a siloed universe. We came from HCI, we came from visual design, we came from front-end engineering. And the way we've run our teams has been really divided in that way. Most of the folks who are entering the field now, they just see tools as tools. I've got a bunch of Cody kinds of tools here. I've got a bunch of pretty picture-y kinds of tools over here. Folks who are coming into the industry now are trained to be much more fluid with what are the tools at my disposal, what are the problems that I have to solve. There's something that's really refreshing about having that fluidity, and also that gets us to question, well, why are we doing things the way that we're doing them? Why am I looking for a user researcher and an interaction designer? Maybe I should get somebody who feels comfortable doing both of those things. It gets me to question what do I get from having those roles specialized, and can I do things in a different way? Which is pretty exciting. There's something about finding a diamond in the rough. And I think about, I'm running a team right now for a client. There are two of my own graduates who are on the team, and I'm working with them. They're both so extraordinary. One was a print designer, the other was a trial lawyer. And just the creative tension between them and the perspectives that they bring to problem solving, it's extraordinary. One of the things that I heard from many of the design leaders that I talked to is both how rewarding it is to find that diamond in the rough, but also how much business sense it makes to build your own pipeline. Particularly a company like Salesforce, for instance. I talked to my friend Noah, who's a VP of design over there. They sometimes have a hard time competing with the sexier companies of the world for talent. But it's really useful to them to find young, excited, passionate, hungry folks and train them to have that deep subject matter expertise. And the truth is that there's if you look at the bell curve of design jobs that are out there, most of the companies around are looking for somebody with between 5 and 8 years experience, or maybe 3 and 8 years experience. If you look at the bell curve of job seekers, there are a lot more folks who are junior. So you could sit there for 6 months to a year with 2 open recs for senior designers waiting to get somebody in the door. Or in that same period of time, you could get in brilliant, energetic, passionate, fresh designers and train them up to be your own pipeline. Pretty exciting. Makes a lot of business sense. So, anybody been on a ride like that? Anybody been on a ride like that with your design team? Anybody scared of hiring junior people? Come on, honest. Interesting. A lot of the folks that I've spoken to in the industry, even a lot of the folks that I've spoken to in the speaker's lounge have said, I wish my company would hire junior, but we're scared to do it. I've heard a lot of design leaders, design directors saying, I wish I could get buy-in from HR to invest in junior people, but the company culture isn't ready for it. I find that a lot of folks look at this truth. You have absolutely got to mentor them. And a lot of folks are afraid of that. A lot of folks, they don't know how to do it. They haven't been trained to do it. They worry that they don't have the time to do it. They worry that they don't have the skill to do it. So they figure, oh, it's just easier to get in mid-level folks or senior folks. I am here to tell you that it's not as scary or intimidating as it might seem. And while a lot of folks in industry might think that leadership is a natural talent, either you have it or you don't, there are specific things that I will send you out of this room after this talk able to do that will empower you to more effectively mentor your junior folks and open up that entire world of enthusiasm for your companies and your teams. So, common challenges. They will absolutely go off the rails if you leave them alone for too long. Very often, I mean, one of the most common characteristics that I see requested in job interviews for designers of all levels is able to work independently. Able to work independently doesn't mean can be successful working by herself in a cave. Design is about problem solving, right? Even those of us who are experienced cannot effectively solve problems by ourselves with no creative tension. You cannot leave them alone and expect them to deliver quality work. And the longer you leave them alone, the more likely the thing that they're going to be making is not the thing that the business or the end user needs. So what do? You must pull them out of the rabbit hole. Now, for those of you who have a big design team, often the best person to pull them out of the rabbit hole is another designer. The best way to get that designer who has 2-3 years of experience to feel and perform like a badass is to give her somebody more junior than she is. So suddenly she has a different perspective about her own skills and her own experience. But whether it's your junior designer, your product manager, your lead developer, your CEO, creative tension is absolutely essential for effective design, right? You know, all of those learn, evaluate diagrams that we see. Every design thinking program in the entire world tells us that we're supposed to put out a hypothesis, try it out, see what we've learned. You must be providing your designers, especially your junior designers, with creative tension. One of the things that I've observed in junior folks when you get them out of design school and into the wild is that they haven't learned yet how to prioritize, how to understand whether the interesting findings that they've discovered as they start peeling back the onion of their design problem, they haven't yet learned how to ask how important is it. So you have to ask them. So one of the hardest things, who here has trouble with estimation prioritization? Half the hands I'm seeing are design leaders with 15+ years of experience. It gets easier, but it's really challenging to know, is your project bigger than a bread box or not? Developers call this, agile developers call it velocity. You do a couple of sprints to figure out how long does it take me to break down a problem like this, and on aggregate, how much work can a development team get done? The only way to develop your sense of how big is this problem, what am I likely to encounter, how abstract is this problem, how much time am I going to need to flesh out what's really going on? That's your 10,000 hours. That's your hours of butt in chair. So the best thing that we can do to develop the junior designers on our team and to invest in the future of our industry is to give them that 10,000 hours and course correct with them regularly, to be clear about prioritization of business goals and to guide the designers to assess how important is this? How relevant is what I found to the end user, and how does that relate to what the business goals are? Again, regular check-ins with somebody. It doesn't have to be that one overburdened director. Regular check-ins with somebody who can give them that perspective is going to be the most important thing that you can do for these junior designers. And also, I would say, one of the things I learned yesterday working on this team with really junior folks is you absolutely have to provide and encourage visibility between design and dev. As soon as your developers don't know what the designers are working on and the designers don't know what the developers are working on, that's when everything starts to go off the rails. So encourage communication and model it yourselves as leaders. I love this. If you take one thing away from this talk, let it be what my friend Dan Brown had to say about the kind of work to give your junior designers. Now, this was a huge surprise. I heard this unanimously across the board, all the design leaders that I spoke to. Unlike what I expected to find. I expected to hear, oh yeah, we have them rev our wireframes. Oh, we have them label the layers in Photoshop. Oh, we have them make our coffee. Successful design leaders are giving their junior designers important, significant work. They're breaking off a piece of something that is valuable to the company and making them start to solve pieces of problems either on their own or on a team. When I talked to Noah over at Salesforce, they hire a lot of interns. And what he told me they do for their interns, every intern has 2 projects. And one is they're paired with a more senior designer on a team, and they get to work on something that's going to ship, where there's some risk involved. They get to work with developers. They have to actually be part of the process. And then they get another project where they get to drive something that they're passionate about, and they get to run it on their own. I found one of the best things that you can do is throw people in a little bit over their head. Make sure that, again, you're having that, as long as you're having that regular connection and that regular check-in, they're not going to go too far off the rails. They're not going to waste your time. They're not going to break anything. But you have to give them a little bit more responsibility than they're comfortable with. You cannot be giving them shit work, but you must be giving them the legwork. For the junior designers that I see in the room, the biggest takeaway for you guys is be willing to do the legwork. I have heard more than a couple of the design leaders say that a common frustration they have is when they get somebody in who isn't willing to do the legwork. I only want to do strategy. Oh, for crying out loud. How do you do strategy unless you've solved small problems and see how they stack up with the bigger and bigger problems that the other folks on the team are working on? So be willing to do the legwork. So you guys know that triangle, the fast, cheap, good, you can only pick 2. One of the truths about junior folks, they have to learn to walk before they can run. They're gonna take a little bit longer to do things. That's your trade-off. That's your trade-off. The only way they're gonna get faster is ass in chair. One of my favorite mentees who has her first really high-powered design job at a small agency. A week, 2 weeks in, she texts me and she goes, oh my God, I am drinking from the fire hose. I feel like I'm so much slower than the designer over there who has 3 years experience, but every day I get faster. So we have to have the patience and just assume that they can do a little bit less. But that's the trade-off that we're getting for paying them a little bit less than the gal who's been around for 3 years and who's able to really crank stuff out. So that's our trade-off, that's our investment, and the lift-off is going to be really impressive if you're giving them meaningful work. The more they understand what the point is of what they're doing, the more they'll put in, and the more that you collectively as a team will get out. Repeat after me, critique is not a dirty word. Thank you very much. Too many people associate critique with criticism. I've had designers, even senior designers on my teams, tell me, can we call it feedback so people don't take it as personally? Critical thinking, you must critique. You must provide them the opportunity to bring their problems and their solutions to you to say, this is how far I've gotten. What am I missing? How do I make this better? There is no way to grow any design team, but particularly a junior design team, without giving them critique. Those of you who are junior designers, some of you know what I'm going to say. You cannot take it personally. It is your job to ask questions. It is your job to make mistakes. It is your job to get the input that you need in order to make that next iteration better, and to walk out of each critique knowing what you want to do next to try and tackle that problem. This is a baseline requirement. In fact, any team that is not doing this is probably making crap. More critique, more critique, more critique. I'm a big glass half full kind of person. So most of this talk, what you're getting from me is do this, do this, do this. This is your one don't. Do not ever take the pen out of any designer's hand, but especially a junior designer. I had a head of product once come to me and say, well, Billie, I don't like the work that this junior designer delivered, so I'm going to take it home and redo it myself. I was floored. And I didn't give him some New York four-letter words. I said, please don't do that. Well, why not? The work's not any good. Well, of course it's not any good. It's her first draft. Well, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to sit her down, give her a good hard critique, make sure she understands what the delta is between the solution we need and the holes that are in the solution that she has delivered. And I'm going to make sure she walks out of there understanding how important it is and knowing what she needs to do in order to get to where she needs to go. As soon as you take the pen out of somebody's hand and say, here, give me that, you can't do it, you have told them you have no confidence in them. You've told them that you're not willing to invest in their development. You've told them that there's a glass ceiling for how valuable their contribution is, and they might as well quit. Don't do that, please. Here was another interesting thing that I found. So particularly for junior designers who have had not as much real work experience before they hit the design field, design is really inspiring. You get really excited about design, and if you don't have as much experience with working with other people in a business, if all you have is a hammer, everything might look like a nail. So a lot of the time, what I've heard from my peers is you get people who are fresh out of design school who assume that design is the only solution. They're not yet able to understand how to collaborate well with the developers or the product managers. They're not yet able to understand how to amend the design process that they learned in design school for this particular problem or this particular release. So the best thing that we can be doing as leaders is, again, the regular check-in, the lift them up, the pulling them out of the weeds. We have to show them the forest because they don't yet know that it's there, which is not that hard. As leaders, that means, okay, well, here's our design problem. What do we think we might be missing? What do we think the developers might contribute? How well does your solution take into account these business goals? Asking them hard questions and including them in the cross-functional collaboration and letting them know what's expected of them is going to be critical to making them productive and empowered. So, who here has heard of the idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset? So, new concept to about half the folks in the room. Difficult concept to explain in a nutshell in 60 seconds. The most important thing that I want you guys to take away from this is there are really two ways that somebody can approach a problem. If you've got a fixed mindset, you think that talent or ability is innate, and either you've got it or not. If you've got a growth mindset, then you value the process of learning and you assume that it's possible to get better. The classic example of how to apply a growth mindset is your designer comes in and says, oh, I'm not any good at this. And you say, you're not good at it yet. That yet is so critical. And then what we are able to give them is a recipe, a set of practices to get from this is really hard for me to that level of mastery. Junior designers are willing to put in the work. But that's that taking the pen out of their hand thing. If you take the pen out of their hand, you are telling them you're not good. There's either good and there's not good and you're not good. So get back in your seat, little monkey. We don't want to be telling them that. We need to be nurturing a growth mindset. Frankly, any kind of progress in design requires that learning is part of what's valuable and what's valued in how we do our work and how we guide each other and how we assess what we're contributing. I really, really recommend that you read up on the work of Dr. Carol Dweck from Stanford. She wrote a book called Mindset that introduced this idea, and it shows up everywhere. It shows up in parenting. It shows up in our peer relationships. It shows up when you try a new video game. The idea of rewarding yourself for being able to learn and expand will absolutely expand your performance and that of the junior people on your team. One of the most surprising things that I heard in my research even from people who I have known for years, who I expected to be really brass tacks and linear and analytical. I heard across the board from everybody I interviewed that one of the most valuable characteristics in a designer is introspection, self-reflection. And most design schools don't teach it. I see some of my grads in this room, these guys learn self-reflection. But a lot of design schools, they've got so much to teach, they forget about the soft skills. It is on us as leaders to, again, with the growth mindset. Well, how do you think you did? How well do you think you solved this problem? How do you know? How would you find out? It's on us to ask these open-ended questions and to put it in the designer's hands for them to be able to make that assessment and for them to get better at making that assessment over time. Mags's warning was really, really valuable. Don't ever give them the answer. Even if you think there is a right answer, which so rarely in design is there a right answer, but if you think there is one, having the humility as a leader to allow for the possibility that you don't have the right answer is part of it. But always prompt for self-reflection. How, you might ask? There are a lot of different ways that you can do it. The cadence of encouraging introspection, there's some amount of it you should do daily, there's some amount of it that you should be doing after a sprint or after a project ships, and there's some amount of it that you should be doing on a quarterly or a semi-annual review cycle. These are some of the questions that I ask and some of the questions that I've heard my peers asking. So I'm going to ask my junior designers every day, what did you learn? What went well? What are you going to do more of? What are you going to stop, start, and continue? What would you do differently? The bottle and the wand are an exercise that I give both my student teams and my project teams when they start working together, and then at the end when they've finished a project together. And it's the gift of helping each other on a peer level, not just a management level, with self-reflection. Often it's hard for us to see our own value, and it's extra hard for folks who are entering a new field for the first time. So I will ask people, tell the person with whom you've worked most closely, if you could wave your magic wand and give them one thing that they need, what would it be? If you could bottle one thing that they have and use it for yourself or share it with others on the team, what would that be? And creating the kind of team in which folks are rewarded, not penalized, for having that kind of introspection and for giving each other that kind of critical and constructive and always applicable critique and feedback. My friend Peter, who gave a workshop the other day, this was what he had to say about demonstrating both humility and respect as a leader. So if I'm the only one who knows anything, it's like, if any of you have ever read, there's an old Harvard Business Review article called Who's Got the Monkey? Anybody ever read that article? Oh my gosh, you guys. Who's Got the Monkey? I think it's available for free as a PDF from, I think, the early 80s. And the basic idea is any task, the responsibility, the onus is a monkey. And if I, as the manager, assume that I'm the only person who can be trusted with the monkeys, then I've got them all. So anytime somebody brings me, anytime somebody on my team brings me a monkey, I listen, I encourage introspection, and I make sure they take their monkeys back where they came from. Otherwise, it looks like the trouble with tribbles, and it's all on me. Again, you give them legwork, not shit work. You make sure that you ask them the questions that help them solve their own problems. But you don't want all the monkeys. It has to be a two-way street. The other thing I will tell you, 100%, every junior designer I've ever worked with, when I demonstrate to them that I trust them to solve their own problems, they achieve, they perform, they blow me away with what they're capable of. One of my biggest throwdowns for all of you, but particularly for leaders, One of the best ways that you can encourage growth mindset in the other people who work with you, alongside you, and for you is to lead with vulnerability, to be willing to show your mess. And sometimes that looks like apologizing when you screw up. Sometimes it looks like inviting other people to help you assess, what could I have done differently? Sometimes it looks like bringing your own work for critique to your own team and getting them to reflect back to you what you might be missing. I did 2 iterations of this talk, and some of the most effective critical feedback came from my own students who showed up and listened and were really honored, but also really effective in telling me what resonated and what didn't resonate for them. We have to be willing to show our own mess to demonstrate that it's okay for the junior folks to show their mess. Anybody ever read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott? Got a couple of folks in here who have read Bird by Bird. It's about writing and how you create any writing project, but it applies to any kind of creative endeavor. The point is, how do you write a novel? How do you write a book report? How do you create a software app that ships? Create a shitty first draft. You must give yourself permission to make a shitty first draft and to figure out what you're missing. So, spoiler alert, 4 of the most useful words in design leadership ever in the history of ever. Start now. What am I missing? Do it yourself. Encourage the people on your team. Here's my best take at solving this problem. Here's what stage it's at. Here's what my brain alone has been able to come up with. And you generate creative tension and a lot of street cred with your people when you ask, what am I missing? At the core, what any 2 of us come up with together should be way better than what any one of us comes up with alone. Junior people in particular need that creative tension, and they need to see that it's still useful for you to be leading with vulnerability, for them to be willing to show you their messy works in progress. If they are not showing you their messy works in progress, that's where they're going to waste a bunch of your time and money. That's why you can't leave them in a cave by themselves to execute. You must set them up with the skills to get that creative tension, to get that critique in order to make their work better. So, how do you hire? How do you find these folks? One of the things that many people will find intimidating, and I will tell you, when you post a junior design job, you'll get a lot of resumes. So the last time I hired an intern, about 1.5 years ago, as soon as I posted the job, 150 resumes. You will get a lot of resumes. If you work for a company with a sexy name, you'll probably get twice that. It's okay. My friend Peter, who used to run UX at Jawbone, he looked at every resume personally, even when he got 300 of them. So junior designers, folks are looking. How do you find that diamond in the rough? How do you assess which of these folks are ready to go and which of these folks still need to be practicing their craft a little bit? One of the most useful pieces of advice that I got from my peers in preparing this talk is, you gotta hire for what you can't teach. Anybody can learn a new set of business processes. Anybody can get on lynda.com and learn the next new tool, whatever it is. Designers, by the way, that means if you think that your job is using Sketch, you're gonna be out of a job in a couple of years. If you're tied to a particular tool rather than to the ability to solve problems, you're gonna hit the end of your ramp when whatever the newest thing is becomes what's in vogue for designers to use. So you gotta hire for the ability to solve problems, for that curiosity, for that passion, for all of these other amazing characteristics that make junior designers so valuable on your team. So here's where to start. A magpie is a bird that likes shiny things. Not as much with design leaders who have been around for a while, but certainly the 400 startups in this town who are looking for their first designer. So often hiring managers or the people who are screening the portfolios just look for the pretty shiny. Don't. Almost anybody can copy and paste images and layer them together. That's not as difficult as being able to solve problems. So one of the most important things that you can do to screen through that pile of resumes and pile of portfolios is look for who's asking why. Who is delivering not only a shiny thing, but showing you how they got there. Who is able to tell a story. Who is able to show vulnerability and where they took some risks and where it paid off and where it didn't pay off. So you definitely want to screen, even at the application materials stage, for why, for problem solving. This was another interesting surprise for me. What I heard when I talked to other leaders in the field was that often a designer's ability to be effective on the job, once you hire somebody and plunk her down on your team, can be really correlated with the extent to which they understand how to work with a design system. So whether they've worked with one before or not, they should be aware of, okay, I come into a company and I find out what patterns are they using. Or I'm working on a freelance project, I find out, is it an Android project or an iOS project, and what's the difference? Where does it make sense to innovate? And where does it make sense to go with what the end user expects or where the other folks, what everybody else in the market has been doing? Junior designers, make sure that you understand what a design system is and you have some sense of how pattern libraries have evolved over the past 10, 15 years in our field and what kinds of questions that you would ask if you start a freelance project or a job where a design system is in place. Again, it's a thing that can evolve, but just the level of awareness of I'm not inventing everything fresh is important both for humility and for ability to hit the ground running. I could talk all day, and in fact, as some of my former students will tell you, I have talked all day about soft skills. Super, super critical in our field. I mean, it probably goes without saying, but we all know that common sense is not that common. Make sure you're asking them probing questions about how they work with other folks. Every week I'm seeing more and more articles about companies that come out declaring that they have a no jerks policy. For crying out loud. It's about time. Make sure that you're assessing not only how well people listen, but how well people stand up and share their viewpoint and participate in creative tension. What I've been telling my students lately is stand for something or you'll fall for anything. A thing that I often ask students in my classroom, I've been teaching a job skills workshop. How many of you guys have been in a relationship with somebody who doesn't want to make any decisions, who wants you to make all the decisions? Show of hands. Probably more of you than are raising your hands. It's terrible. Again, you've got all the monkeys. In a mentoring relationship, it's the worst if somebody says, I am your blank slate, fill me up with all the things. No, that's not how it works. You need people who have perspective, who have backbone, who are going to ask you questions, who are going to engage in creative tension with you. Not who are going to be jerks, but who are really going to show up and participate. So make sure that you're screening for these kinds of things. Here's one technique that has been really, really useful for me. Most people in a job interview setting can really practice telling you what they think you want to hear. It becomes harder and harder for them to do that when you ask for specific examples. Tell me about a time when you worked on a project with folks and it was painful. What did you learn? Was there a time after that that you were able to apply what you learned and have it go better? Tell me about a time that you worked on a project that you were really, really proud of. What was so fantastic about it? Tell me about a time when you failed. What would you do differently? What did you learn? Along with those evidence-based questions, I find that one of the most effective things that I can do, particularly with these junior folks who are getting coached to a huge extent on what hiring managers want to hear, what hiring managers want to hear. I'll do things like lean a little bit and say, so, what's the shittiest job you ever had? What sucked about it? And the combination of the posture and the profanity often will just get them right off script. And you can tell, I remember one of my very first groups of students 2.5 years ago, there was a guy who had exactly the subject matter background from his previous life to do fantastically at my friend's company. And I introduced them at a hiring event. It went fantastically well. I was really excited for both of them. He shows up to the interview. And when she starts applying some of these evidence-based interviewing tasks, tell me about a project that really went off the rails. He threw everyone else under the bus. Everybody else on his project team, I was perfect and they all screwed up. Wah, 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 wah. No job for him. So on both sides of the table, really important to try and get people off script, also to be extraordinarily authentic on both sides. One of the most surprising things that I found across the board, really, was the value that, I mean, again, even guys who I expected to be really analytical and brass tacks about it, everybody said, do the best you can to show up and be authentic and show them what it's going to be like to work with you on the daily. We spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our families. So the best thing that we can do on both sides of that interviewing table is to be as authentic as we can and to get a sense of what's it going to be like when we have to solve a hard problem together. So again, on the junior designer side, you've got to really show up and figure out what you stand for. And on the leadership side, you have to have the guts to be vulnerable yourself and possibly to make people and yourself a little bit uncomfortable. Almost done, then I'll take a couple questions if we have time. So, to review, a couple of the techniques that we have to hire, inspire, and motivate designers. A few new tools you have. Show your mess, evidence-based interviewing, cultivate a growth mindset, encourage introspection, invest in helping them walk so they can run, pull them out of the rabbit hole. All things that every one of us should be able to do right now. Maybe not that intuitive for us, maybe not the way that we've been leading our teams beforehand, but certainly if you do these things, you absolutely have everything you need to be able to take advantage of how awesome some of these junior folks are and to invest in the future of our profession. I will end by telling you this. These faces, some of whom were in this room, these guys absolutely changed my life. I have been leading design teams for coming up on 20 years. And it wasn't until the past 2.5 years where I started teaching junior designers, folks who were coming into our field, I developed an entirely new perspective on the value of my knowledge, on what's different about my experience from what I think everyone else's experience might be. I developed more passion for my own field than I had thought was possible after doing this work for such a long time. I was out of you-know-whats to give, frankly, before I started engaging with folks for whom this field was new. And what they have given me is head and shoulders more valuable, I think, than the effort that I've put in to train them up. So my bold throwdown for you guys is take a chance. Bring some more vulnerability into your own leadership. Invest in some of these amazing people. Do me a favor, those of you who are junior designers who have been in my class, stand up. Stand up, come on. Thank you. Thank you guys for changing my life. Hire them. Hire the other junior designers in the room. You will not regret it. Whoops, wrong arrow. That's how to reach me. Do I have time for questions, Cameron?
We're out of time, but can you stick around for a few minutes?
I can absolutely stick around for questions. Thank you all for joining me.